Hi, I'm Emily Harris. I'm 27, and last Christmas I was sitting at our family table, the house filled with the smell of honey-glazed ham and cinnamon, when my sister Hannah looked me dead in the eye and said, "You need to leave." It felt like the air was sucked out of the room. I had no idea that one sentence would tear our family apart and force me to fight for the home I thought I'd lost. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories. Now let me tell you how that Christmas dinner changed everything. A month ago, I was working at a small marketing agency in Austin, Texas, still trying to hold it together after my boyfriend of 4 years cheated on me with a coworker. I thought losing him was the worst thing that could happen, but then I lost my job too when the agency cut half its staff. Just like that, I was single, unemployed, and standing in my tiny apartment surrounded by boxes I couldn't afford to move. Mom and Dad didn't even hesitate when I called them, my voice shaking as I told them everything. Dad Frank, 65, with his quiet strength and calloused hands from years of carpentry, simply said, "Come home, honey." Mom Martha, 63, warm and steady, promised there would always be a room for me. So I packed what I could, left the keys on the counter, and moved back to the house I grew up in, hoping it would only be temporary. I tried to pull my weight. I paid what I could toward the electric bill, helped with groceries, and made sure the house was clean. I mowed the lawn so Dad didn't have to, and I helped Mom plant winter flowers by the mailbox. We fell into an easy rhythm, sharing morning coffee on the porch and watching the neighborhood wake up. At night, we'd watch old movies while I applied for jobs, determined to find something soon so I could move out again. But Hannah made everything harder. My sister Hannah, 31, had moved back in with Mom and Dad a month before I did. She was going through a messy divorce and had 2 kids under 5 who needed constant attention. She was exhausted, stressed, and sharp around the edges in a way that made everyone in the house walk on eggshells. She never outright said it, but I could feel her eyes on me every time I laughed with Mom or offered to help with dinner. Christmas Eve came and the house smelled like honey-glazed ham and cinnamon rolls. Strings of white lights lined the windows, and Mom had set out the good plates, the ones with tiny green holly leaves around the edges. The living room was cluttered with toys, gift bags, and the half-wrapped presents Hannah's kids had already torn into. The tree glowed softly, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe we would have a quiet, warm holiday together. I was in the kitchen helping Mom with the mashed potatoes, sprinkling in a bit more salt and pepper as she stirred when Hannah walked in. She stood by the fridge, arms crossed, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes tired but still hard as they flicked from Mom to me. "Need any help?" she asked, her voice flat, but I could hear the tension in it. "We've got it, sweetie," Mom said, wiping her hands on a towel and giving her a small smile. Hannah didn't say anything else. She turned and walked out, her footsteps sharp against the tile floor. Mom sighed, pressing her lips together, but didn't say a word. We carried the food into the dining room, setting everything out on the red tablecloth Mom only used on holidays. Dad was pouring sweet tea into glasses, and Hannah was helping her youngest into a booster seat, her movements stiff. I took my seat next to Mom, trying to ignore the way Hannah's eyes followed me as I reached for the napkins. Dinner started quietly with Dad saying grace, his deep voice steady as he thanked God for family and for getting us through a hard year. The kids were already picking at their rolls, crumbs scattering across their plates, and Mom laughed softly, passing the gravy down the table. I tried to relax. I tried to focus on the warmth of the food, the soft music playing from the radio in the corner, the quiet murmur of family that should have felt comforting. I asked Hannah's oldest about the toy car he was holding, and he smiled shyly, showing me how the doors opened and closed. But when I reached for the pitcher of water to refill my glass, I felt Hannah's eyes on me again. Her voice cut through the room, flat and cold, just as I started pouring. "Emily, when are you planning to get your own place?" The water sloshed over the rim of my glass, dripping onto my hand. I set the pitcher down, the weight of her words hitting harder than I expected. The table went silent, the soft Christmas music in the background suddenly too loud, too cheerful for what was happening. Dad cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "Hannah, let's just enjoy dinner, all right?" But Hannah didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on me, her jaw tight. "I'm just asking. It's been months and we're all cramped in here." Mom reached over, touching Hannah's hand gently. Sweetheart, this isn't the time. Hannah pulled her hand back, shaking her head. When is the time, Mom? When we can't walk through the living room because of all her boxes. When the kids have to sleep on the floor because there's no space left. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, embarrassment, and anger mixing in my chest. I'm looking for a job, Hannah. You know that. She let out a dry laugh. Looking sure. But how long is it going to take? I can't keep telling the kids they can't have their own room because Aunt Emily needs space to figure things out. Her words felt like tiny cuts, each one sharper than the last. I looked down at my plate, pushing around the green beans I'd helped Mom cook earlier that day. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see if I would argue back. Dad's voice was calm but firm. That's enough, Hannah. No, Dad, it's not enough, she snapped, her voice rising. You think I like living here? You think I want to be in this house again, starting over with 2 kids sharing a room, trying to build a new life? At least I'm trying. I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. My heart was pounding and I could feel tears threatening to spill over, but I swallowed them back. I wouldn't cry, not now, not in front of everyone. Mom reached for my hand under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. Emily helps around the house. She pays for groceries when she can. She's doing her best. Hannah rolled her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. Her best isn't good enough anymore. Mom, we need that room. The kids need it. And Emily needs to grow up and take care of herself. Her youngest, a little girl with curly brown hair, looked up from her plate, her big eyes confused. Mommy, why are you mad at Aunt Emily? Hannah's face softened for a split second before she looked away, blinking quickly. Eat your dinner, baby. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. Hannah, I'm not trying to take anything away from you or the kids. I'm trying to get back on my feet. It's been a hard year. Her eyes snapped back to mine, sharp again. It's been a hard year for everyone, Emily. You're not the only one struggling, but at some point you have to stop expecting Mom and Dad to fix everything for you. I could feel Dad's tension from across the table, the way his hand gripped his fork, his knuckles turning white. Mom's eyes were pleading, darting between us, hoping this would end. The kids were quiet, watching the adults argue, their Christmas dinner forgotten. The warmth of the food was gone, replaced with the cold tension hanging in the air. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the wood floor. I'm doing the best I can, Hannah, I said, my voice low but clear. Hannah leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a tight smile. Well, your best isn't enough anymore. I glanced at Mom, her eyes filled with worry, then at Dad, who looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I turned away, heading toward the kitchen, needing to breathe, needing to clear my head before I said something I couldn't take back. I could hear Hannah's voice behind me, quiet but sharp. You've got 1 week, Emily. 1 week to figure out where you're going. I paused at the doorway, gripping the edge of the frame, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the soft Christmas carols still playing in the corner. The lights on the tree blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. In that moment, I knew everything was about to change. Emily, you really should start looking for somewhere else to live. The words sliced through the soft crackle of the fireplace, and I turned around slowly, still holding the edge of the doorway. Hannah sat at the table, her back straight, her eyes sharp and unblinking. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as if she had been practicing this moment. Mom looked up from her plate, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Dad's head turned sharply toward Hannah, his brow furrowing. My hands were shaking, so I pressed them against my jeans, trying to keep steady. Hannah, please, not now, Mom said quietly, her voice carrying a tremble. Hannah didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on me, her jaw tight. When, Mom? When is the right time? When we're all still pretending everything's fine while Emily sits here like a guest in a house that's already too crowded. My mouth opened but nothing came out. My mind scrambled for words, but they all felt stuck in my throat, heavy and useless. Hannah's 2 kids sat on either side of her, their small faces confused as they looked between us. One of them dropped a piece of bread on the floor, but no one moved to pick it up. Hannah, we're having dinner, Dad said, his voice low, warning. She sighed, rolling her eyes as she leaned back in her chair. I know, Dad, but let's not act like we can keep ignoring this. We're all adults here. I could hear the scrape of a chair behind me as Uncle Ray shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Karen cleared her throat, but the room stayed painfully silent. I'm sorry if this is awkward. Hannah continued, her voice carrying that false calmness that made my skin crawl, but I can't keep watching you sit here acting like you're not taking advantage of Mom and Dad. My breath caught heat rushing to my face. I could see the turkey and mashed potatoes on my plate, the cranberry sauce smeared across the white china, but I couldn't taste anything. I'm not taking advantage of anyone, I managed to say, but my voice was so small I wasn't sure anyone heard it. Hannah laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that made me flinch. Really, Emily, you've been here for months. You don't have a job, you don't have a plan, and you're taking up space that my kids need. Mom reached across the table, touching Hannah's hand again. Please, Hannah, this isn't fair. Emily is trying. Hannah pulled her hand away, shaking her head. Trying isn't enough, Mom. We're all trying. I'm working part-time, dealing with a divorce, raising 2 kids in 1 bedroom, and Emily is sitting here like she's on vacation. The words hit me hard, each one digging into old insecurities I had tried to bury. I felt like I was shrinking in front of everyone, my shoulders curling and my throat tight. Dad set his fork down, the sound of it hitting the plate louder than it should have been. Hannah, you need to stop. No, Dad, I'm done stopping. She shot back, her eyes glinting. Emily needs to hear this. She needs to understand that she can't just stay here forever acting like this is normal. I felt Mom's eyes on me, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. I wanted to look at her to find some comfort there, but I couldn't lift my eyes from the table. Hannah's voice softened, but the words were still sharp. You need to get your life together, Emily. You need to move out. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the soft hum of the heater kicking on. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for me to say something to defend myself, but I couldn't find the words. I reached for my water glass, my hand trembling, and took a sip just to give myself something to do, something to hold on to while the room pressed in around me. I could see Hannah's reflection in the glass, her expression calm, satisfied, like she had finally said what she needed to say. I set the glass down carefully, my fingers leaving faint smudges on the surface. Hannah, that's enough, Dad said, his voice low but carrying across the table. But Hannah didn't even blink. No, Dad, it's not enough. It's the truth. Her words felt like ice against my skin, each one slicing into the warmth I had tried to hold on to. The soft glow of the Christmas lights on the tree seemed to dim as I stared at the table, my breathing tight. I'm sorry if this is uncomfortable for everyone. Hannah continued, glancing around the table with fake concern, but it needs to be said. Uncle Ray shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. Aunt Karen sipped her wine, avoiding eye contact with me. A few cousins exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable, but I could hear the low hum of whispers. Mom tried to smile, her hands shaking as she reached for the breadbasket. Let's just eat, okay? It's Christmas. Hannah's laugh was short, empty. Christmas doesn't pay the bills, Mom. We're all here pretending everything's fine while Emily sits here taking up space that my kids need. My head shot up, my eyes meeting hers, but she didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, cold, the corners of her mouth twitching like she was holding back another smirk. I'm not taking up space, I managed to say, but my voice cracked halfway through. Hannah tilted her head, looking at me like I was a child. You are Emily. You don't have a job, you don't pay rent. You're here because it's easy. Mom's eyes glistened, her lips parting as if to speak, but Hannah cut her off. And don't tell me she's helping around the house, Mom. That doesn't pay the mortgage, and it doesn't buy groceries for 3 extra people. Dad's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, staring down at his plate like he was trying to find the right words. I clenched my hands and my lap nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell her she didn't know what she was talking about, that I was trying, that I was applying for jobs every day, that I helped Mom clean, cook, and took care of the yard so Dad didn't have to. But the words felt stuck heavy in my throat, and I could see the way Hannah's eyes scanned the table, taking in the nods of a few family members, the way they shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but not willing to speak up. Hannah took a sip of her water, setting the glass down with a quiet click. I'm not saying this to be cruel, Emily. I'm saying it because it's reality. You're 27. You should be out there living your life, not hiding here while everyone else cleans up your mess. My vision blurred as tears welled up, but I blinked them back, refusing to let her see me cry. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "Hannah, please stop." Hannah's eyes softened as she looked at Mom. "I love you, Mom, but you and Dad are enabling her. She needs to grow up." The silence that followed was thick, pressing against my ears. I could hear the kids in the living room laughing as they played with their new toys, the sound of wrapping paper crinkling as they tore it apart, unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. I picked up my fork, my hands shaking as I tried to take another bite of the now cold turkey, chewing slowly, forcing myself to swallow even as my stomach twisted. Hannah leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, her eyes never leaving mine. "You have 1 week, Emily," she said, her voice calm, final. "1 week to figure out where you're going, because you can't stay here anymore." The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the plate, the sound ringing out in the quiet room. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. All I could see was Hannah's face, her cold eyes locked on mine, waiting for me to break. I used to believe Hannah would always protect me, but I was wrong. She didn't look away as I picked up the fork with shaking hands, setting it back onto the plate. The silence around the table was heavy, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the wood floor, and walked into the kitchen without saying a word. Behind me, I could hear Hannah's voice, low and calm, as she started talking to Dad about the bills, about the space, about doing what's best for the family. Each word dug deeper, pulling at memories I didn't want to remember. When we were kids, I thought Hannah was my hero. She would walk me home from school, telling off the boys who tried to push me around. She shared her Halloween candy with me when mine ran out, braided my hair before picture day, and promised she would always look out for me. I leaned against the kitchen counter, pressing my palms flat against the cool surface, trying to stop the shaking in my arms. The sound of Hannah's voice in the dining room was muffled, but I could still hear the sharpness in her words, the way she was taking control, claiming the space that used to feel like home. Later that night, I heard her on the phone. I was walking down the hallway, heading toward the laundry room to grab the sweater I'd left in the dryer, when I heard her voice drifting from the living room. "I'm telling you, Julie, she's not even trying," Hannah said, her voice low but clear. "She's just sitting here using Mom and Dad's kindness, eating their food, running up their bills." I froze, pressing myself against the wall, the laundry room forgotten. "No, she doesn't have a job," Hannah continued, letting out a sharp laugh. "She says she's looking, but I don't see any progress. Meanwhile, the kids are stuck in that tiny room, and she's got the biggest bedroom in the house." There was a pause, and I could hear her sigh. I know, but Mom won't say anything to her, and Dad just keeps making excuses. Someone has to do something." I closed my eyes, swallowing hard as her words sank in. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a storm, cold and alone, while the person I used to trust most was tearing me apart to someone else. I turned and walked back to my room, the house feeling smaller with every step. I closed the door quietly, sinking onto the bed as my mind spun. I thought about the job interviews that hadn't gone anywhere, the rejection emails piling up in my inbox, the way I tried to help around the house, hoping it was enough. Earlier that week, Hannah had started moving more boxes into the living room, stacking them along the walls, claiming she needed the space for the kids' toys and clothes. I could see the way she looked at my room, her eyes scanning the door like she was already planning what to do when it was empty. I pulled my knees to my chest, resting my forehead against them, trying to block out the voices in my head, telling me I was a burden, that maybe Hannah was right. Maybe I was just taking up space I didn't deserve. The room was quiet except for the hum of the heater kicking on, the glow of the small lamp in the corner casting soft shadows across the floor. I could still smell the leftovers from dinner, the honey-glazed ham, the mashed potatoes now cold in the kitchen. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with a notification from a job site, but I couldn't bring myself to reach for it. I felt tired, like every part of me was heavy, weighed down by the disappointment in Hannah's voice, the quiet judgment in the eyes of the family at the table. I thought about leaving, about packing up my few boxes and driving away in the middle of the night, disappearing so Hannah could have the space she wanted, so Mom and Dad wouldn't have to choose between us. I wondered if that would make it easier for everyone. But deep down I knew leaving wasn't the answer, not yet. I sat there on the edge of my bed, the moonlight slipping through the blinds, striping the floor in pale lines. My room was quiet, too quiet, with only the faint hum of the heater and the soft ticking of the clock on my dresser. I could hear Hannah's footsteps in the hallway moving toward the living room, the sound of a box being dropped, tape ripping, her low voice telling the kids to keep quiet because Aunt Emily is probably asleep. She was already moving in, already claiming space, while I was still here, still breathing in the scent of lavender from the candle Mom had placed on my nightstand to help me sleep. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway, hot and sharp, sliding down my cheeks as I tried not to sob. I thought about how Hannah used to braid my hair before school, how she used to tell me stories to help me fall asleep when I was scared of the dark. She used to tell me she'd always protect me no matter what. Now she was the one pushing me out, turning the place I thought was safe into a battlefield I hadn't asked to fight in. The next morning, I woke up early, the cold air biting at my skin as I slipped on a sweater and moved to the kitchen. I made coffee for Mom and Dad, pouring it into their mugs the way I always did, adding a splash of cream for Mom, leaving Dad's black. Hannah walked in, her hair pulled back, eyes sharp, even in the early light. She barely looked at me as she started making breakfast for the kids, her movements fast and loud, pots clanging, cabinet doors slamming. "Morning," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't look up. "Morning." I wanted to tell her that I was trying, that I was applying for jobs every day, that I didn't want to be here any more than she wanted me here. But the words felt heavy, useless, so I took a step back, letting her move around the kitchen like she owned it. I spent the day sending out resumes, scrolling through job listings, applying for positions. I wasn't even sure I wanted, just to prove to myself that I was trying, that I wasn't what Hannah said I was. Rejection emails rolled in one after another, each one a small stab that reminded me how stuck I really was. In the afternoon, I heard Hannah on the phone again. I stood outside the kitchen door, hidden, listening. "I don't know, Julie," she said, her voice low, tired but firm. "She's just here, and Mom and Dad keep letting it happen. It's like she's waiting for someone to rescue her, but I'm done watching it." She paused, letting out a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah, she's sending out resumes, but that's not the point. She needs to leave, Julie. She needs to figure out how to live on her own." Her words were like poison slipping under my skin, settling in the spaces where I tried to keep hope alive. "She's making it harder for everyone," Hannah continued. "The bills are higher, the house is crowded, and the kids need space. I can't keep pretending it's fine." I stepped away, moving down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I went back to my room, closing the door softly behind me, sinking to the floor as the weight of her words pressed against me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of the streetlights spilling in through the window. I thought about packing my boxes, about loading them into the back of my car and leaving while everyone was asleep, disappearing so they could have their space, so they wouldn't have to deal with me anymore. Tears slipped down my cheeks, soaking into the pillow as I pulled the blanket tighter around me, trying to keep the cold out, trying to keep the fear out. In the darkness, I whispered to myself, my voice shaking. Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't belong here. And for the first time, I wondered if leaving was the only way to make it stop. The thought of leaving followed me into the morning. I moved through the house like a ghost, quiet, careful, afraid to take up space. Hannah's laughter with the kids in the kitchen felt sharp in my ears, reminding me that I was an outsider in a place I once called home. I stayed in my room, scrolling through job postings, sending out resumes, waiting for replies that never came. Every ding of my phone made my heart jump, but it was never a job offer, only another rejection, another reminder that maybe Hannah was right. That afternoon, as I sat on the floor sorting through a box of old papers, I found the corner of a worn book sticking out, its spine cracked and pages yellowed. I pulled it free, flipping through the pages, and a small envelope fell out, landing softly in my lap. My breath caught. I remembered. I was 18, standing in Grandma Ruth's living room, her soft hands holding mine. Her eyes were tired but kind, the kind of eyes that saw everything but never judged. "If the day comes when you feel like you have nowhere else to go," she had said, pressing the envelope into my hand, "open this." I had smiled, telling her I would, but I never thought I would need it. I tucked it into the book, telling myself I would keep it safe, but the years passed and I forgot. Until now. My fingers shook as I opened the envelope, unfolding the letter written in her careful handwriting. Tears blurred the words as I read. "My dearest Emily, life is not always fair, and family can sometimes forget the love they owe each other. Your grandfather and I have made arrangements so you will always have a place to come home to no matter what happens. This house is yours, given to you with the hope that it will be your safe place when the world feels heavy. I pressed the letter to my chest, letting out a shaky breath. I reached into the envelope again and found the paperwork, the deed to the house signed and notarized, dated the week of my 18th birthday. I sat there on the floor, the sunlight shifting across the carpet, the sounds of Hannah's voice in the kitchen, the kids laughing, the clatter of dishes. But I didn't hear it the same way anymore. I wasn't just a guest here. I wasn't taking up space. This house was mine. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, standing up slowly, the papers clutched against my chest. I moved to the window, looking out at the yard, at the tree Dad and I had planted when I was 6, at the porch swing Mom loved to sit on during summer evenings. This was my home. I turned and looked around my room. The small space I had tried to make feel like mine again. The blankets neatly folded, the books stacked on the nightstand, the lavender candle burned halfway down. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight in my chest shift, turning from fear into something steady, something that felt like resolve. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could stand up straight. I pulled on a sweater, folding the letter and the deed, carefully sliding them into the inside pocket close to my heart. I glanced at myself in the mirror, my hair pulled back, eyes red but clear. I opened my door, stepping into the hallway, each step feeling heavier and lighter at the same time, the papers pressing against my chest like a promise. I walked past the family photos on the wall, past the decorations Hannah had put up for the kids, past the laughter coming from the kitchen, and I kept walking until I reached the living room. And I stopped, standing there ready. Hannah was sitting on the couch, her phone in one hand, a mug in the other. The kids were playing with blocks on the floor, their laughter filling the room, but Hannah's eyes lifted to me the second she saw me standing there. She raised an eyebrow, a small smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth. "What is it now, Emily?" My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear her, but I kept my feet planted, tightening my grip on the papers in my pocket. Dad looked up from the recliner, his eyes tired, searching my face. "Emily, you okay, honey?" I swallowed hard, pulling the letter from my pocket, the folded edges soft from where I had held it all morning. I held it in both hands, looking down at it, then back up at Hannah. "Do you remember what Grandma Ruth told me when I turned 18? I asked, my voice shaking but clear. Hannah scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Emily, this isn't the time for stories. We need to talk about your plans." I took a breath, steadying my voice. "She gave me a letter that day. She said, if you ever feel like you don't have a place here, open this." Mom stepped into the doorway, drying her hands on a towel, her eyes wide, her lips parting as she looked at the paper in my hands. "What letter, Dad?" asked, sitting forward, his elbows on his knees. I opened the letter, carefully unfolding it so they could see the handwriting the way Grandma had written my name at the top, the words careful, deliberate. "This letter," I said, my voice firmer now. "She and Grandpa made sure I would always have a place to come home to." Hannah let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "Emily, what are you even talking about? You think a letter changes the fact that you need to get out and grow up." I reached into my pocket again, pulling out the deed, the paper shaking as I held it up. "It's not just a letter, Hannah." Mom gasped, softly covering her mouth with her hand. Dad stood up slowly, his eyes locked on the paper in my hands, the reality of what I was holding starting to sink in. "What is that?" Hannah demanded, standing, now her voice rising, the kids looking up at her startled. "It's the deed to this house," I said. My voice steady, the words clear. "Grandma and Grandpa transferred it to me on my 18th birthday. This house is mine." The silence that followed felt like the world had stopped spinning. Hannah's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words. "No, that's not possible. That's not." Mom's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. "Ruth and Charles talked about doing something like that, but I didn't know they actually did it." Dad took a step toward me, reaching for the paper, his hands trembling as he read the names, the signatures, the dates. He looked back at me, tears filling his eyes. "Honey, we didn't know," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We didn't know." Hannah took a step forward, her eyes sharp, her hands clenched into fists. "So, what you think this means? You get to stay here forever? You think this changes the fact that you're a burden on everyone?" I felt something inside me shift, the fear that had been living in my chest, turning into something solid, like strength. "No, Hannah," I said, lifting my chin. It means I don't have to leave. Her eyes narrowed, her mouth twisting into a sneer. You think this changes everything? I looked at the kids, their wide eyes watching us, the blocks forgotten on the floor, and then back at Hannah. It changes enough. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Hannah didn't say a word as she turned away, storming down the hallway, her steps heavy against the wood floor. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, the papers still in my hand, the kids staring in silence. Mom moved first, stepping forward, her eyes filled with tears, touching my arm gently. Emily, we didn't know. We truly didn't know. Dad nodded, running a hand over his face, looking older than I had ever seen him. Your grandmother always wanted you to feel safe, honey. I swallowed, my throat tight, but I nodded, folding the papers, carefully sliding them back into my pocket. I know, Dad. The kids went back to their blocks, quietly picking them up, the tension still thick in the air, but no one spoke about it again that day. 2 days later, Christmas dinner came, the table set with Mom's good china, the smell of turkey and cinnamon filling the house. The lights on the tree glowed softly, and the kids laughed as they played with their new toys near the fireplace. Hannah moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened, but her eyes never met mine. She placed dishes on the table, adjusted the silverware, her jaw tight, the muscle there ticking whenever I came too close. We all sat down, Dad saying grace, thanking God for family, for health, for another year together. His voice shook at the end, and he cleared his throat quickly, glancing at me before he opened his eyes. Dinner started quietly, the clinking of forks, the soft murmur of small conversations filling the room. I tried to eat, focusing on the warmth of the food, the way the mashed potatoes tasted like home, the way Mom smiled at me across the table. But I could feel Hannah watching me, her gaze sharp, cold, waiting for the right moment. It didn't take long. She set down her fork, leaning back in her chair, her arms crossed. We still need to talk about Emily's plans to move out. The words dropped into the conversation like a stone in water, the ripples spreading across the table as everyone fell silent. Mom's eyes widened, her hand reaching for Dad's under the table. Dad cleared his throat, his eyes moving to me, then back to Hannah. Hannah, we've talked about this. She laughed, but it was a hollow sound, sharp and humorless. No, Dad, we've avoided it. Emily can't stay here forever. She needs to find her own place, and we all know it. I didn't flinch this time. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the letter and the deed, setting them gently on the table in front of me. The papers looked small, almost fragile on the dark wood, but they felt like steel in my hands. I'm not leaving, I said, my voice calm, steady. Hannah's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smirk. What, you think waving that letter around changes reality, Emily? You think it makes you less of a burden? Dad reached for the papers, unfolding them carefully, his eyes scanning the words, his brow furrowing. Mom leaned in, reading over his shoulder, her hand covering her mouth as she read. Hannah snorted. This is ridiculous. Do you really think anyone is going to believe this? Dad looked up, his voice firm. It's real, Hannah. It's all here, signed, notarized, legal. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, the soft crackle of the fire in the living room. The kids stopped playing, watching us with wide, silent eyes. I met Hannah's gaze, holding it. I stayed quiet because I wanted to respect this family. I didn't want this to become a fight, but I won't let you push me out of my own home. Her face went red, her mouth opening, then closing again, searching for words she couldn't find. She glanced around the table, looking for support, but no one spoke. Mom's voice was soft, but it was clear. Emily has every right to be here. Hannah's hands clenched around her napkin, her knuckles white, her eyes flashing with anger. This is a scam, she hissed. And then, with a sharp motion, she threw the napkin down on the table, the fabric landing in her plate, gravy splattering onto the tablecloth as she pushed her chair back, standing so fast it scraped loudly against the floor. This is a scam. Hannah's voice cracked through the dining room, sharp and furious. She stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing as she pointed at the papers on the table. The kids froze their forks in midair, the sound of the Christmas carols on the radio suddenly too loud. Dad stood slowly, placing the papers down, his eyes steady on Hannah. It's not a scam, Hannah. It's legal. Your grandmother did this for Emily. Hannah let out a harsh laugh, her hands shaking at her sides. You're all just going to let her get away with this. With lying, With stealing this house from the family, Mom's eyes were red as she tried to stand, but her voice was calm. No one is stealing anything. Your grandmother made sure Emily would always have a home. Hannah's face twisted, her lip curling in disgust. Of course you'd take her side. You always do. I felt my hands trembling under the table, but I kept my chin up, breathing slow, steady, not letting Hannah see the fear she wanted. I didn't want to pull this out, Hannah. But you left me no choice. She spun toward me, her eyes narrowing. You think you're better than me, Emily. You think you're entitled to this house while I'm out there working, raising 2 kids on my own, trying to survive. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping back, the legs catching on the rug. I think I have the right to stay in the house my grandmother gave me. I think I have the right to not be pushed out by you. The silence was thick, the only sound the soft clink of a spoon slipping from one of the kids' hands onto the plate. Hannah's breathing was ragged, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles were white. You're nothing but a leech, Emily. You're pathetic. I swallowed, my voice calm even as my heart pounded in my ears. I've been trying, Hannah. I've been applying for jobs, helping around here, paying what I can. But this house is mine, and I'm not leaving. Dad's hand rested on the table, steadying himself, his voice deep and tired. Enough, both of you. But Hannah shook her head violently, taking a step back. No, Dad, it's not enough. This is a lie. It has to be. She reached across the table, grabbing the papers, flipping through them with shaking hands, her eyes darting over the signatures, the dates, the stamps. Her face fell, the color draining as she realized it was all real. She threw the papers back onto the table, the sound sharp echoing in the room. Her eyes snapped to mine, filled with something that looked like betrayal and rage twisted together. This is a lie, she screamed, grabbing her napkin, crumpling it in her fist, and slamming it down on the table. She turned on her heels, storming out of the dining room, her footsteps heavy down the hallway, the door to her room slamming shut so hard it rattled the picture frames on the wall. The silence that followed felt endless. I stood there, breathing hard, the papers scattered on the table in front of me, the Christmas tree lights blinking softly in the corner, the smell of turkey and cinnamon suddenly making me sick. Mom sank back into her chair, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. Dad picked up the papers, folding them carefully, setting them back in front of me with a nod. And I stood there staring at the closed hallway door, knowing this wasn't over. It started the next morning, before the coffee even finished brewing. Hannah stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, blocking the doorway as I walked in. Her eyes were puffy, but the coldness in them was sharper than ever. We need to talk about the Honda, she said, her voice flat. I froze, my hand on the cabinet, feeling the words hit like a slap. What about it? She tilted her head, a small, humorless smile on her lips. It's Mom and Dad's car, Emily. It's family property. If you're not going to leave, you can at least give the car back. My stomach twisted, but I kept my voice calm. I've been paying for that car, Hannah. Every month, the insurance, the repairs, the gas. I use it to go to interviews, to get groceries, to help Mom and Dad. She rolled her eyes, letting out a small laugh. Please, Emily, don't act like you're doing us all a favor. That car belongs to this family, and if you're going to squat here, you don't get to keep it. I took a slow breath, feeling the heat rise in my chest, my hands clenching at my sides. You know it's in their name for insurance reasons. But I'm the one making the payments. Hannah stepped closer, her eyes sharp, her voice low. Prove it. I didn't say anything. I turned, walked to my room, pulled open the drawer where I kept the paperwork, the bank statements, the receipts from every payment I made over the last 2 years. I walked back into the kitchen, slapping the stack of papers onto the table in front of her. Here. Every payment, every month from my account. You want proof? There it is. She flipped through the pages, her jaw tightening, her fingers turning white as she gripped the paper. You think this means you own the car? She snapped, looking up at me. I crossed my arms, meeting her gaze. It means you don't. Mom walked in, stopping when she saw us, her eyes flicking to the papers on the table. What's going on? Hannah didn't look at her. I'm making sure Emily doesn't take everything. Dad appeared behind Mom, his arms folded, his face tired. Hannah, that's enough. But Hannah wasn't listening. She slammed the papers back onto the table. You think you can just keep taking Emily? First the house, now the car. What's next, huh? What else do you think you're entitled to? The kids peeked around the corner, their small faces pale, watching as Hannah's voice rose. Mom tried to guide them away, but they stood frozen, their toys forgotten in their hands. I felt something crack inside me, the exhaustion of fighting, of proving, of standing alone. But beneath it something stronger burned, something that felt like steel in my spine. I'm not taking anything that doesn't belong to me, I said quietly. Hannah's laugh was bitter, sharp. You're a thief, Emily. You always have been. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers, my voice steady even as my heart pounded in my chest. You want to fight over this car, Hannah? You want to take this to court, call your lawyer, drag Mom and Dad into your drama? She blinked, caught off guard by the calm in my voice, the way I didn't flinch. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice, so only she could hear. You want war, fine. I straightened up, holding her gaze, feeling the fear leave my body, replaced by something cold and clear. Let's go. Hannah's eyes flickered, a flash of uncertainty breaking through her glare. But it was gone just as quickly. She lifted her chin, crossing her arms. You think you're tough now, Emily. We'll see how tough you are when a lawyer explains the law to you. Dad stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Hannah, enough. This has gone too far. She didn't even look at him. Dad, you're going to let her steal everything you worked for, first the house, now the car. You're going to let her walk all over this family. Mom's voice was soft, trembling. It's not stealing, Hannah. The car was in our name to help her, but she paid for it. Hannah scoffed, her laugh sharp. Of course you're defending her. You always defend her. I took a slow breath, feeling the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't let it out. I reached for the folder I had brought from my room, flipping it open on the table, spreading out the payment receipts, the bank statements, the insurance papers. Every payment, every month from my account, I said, my voice steady. I've kept every receipt, every statement in case something like this happened. Hannah's eyes darted to the papers, her jaw tightening. You think that matters? It matters to the law, I replied calmly. She reached for one of the papers, her hand shaking as she read it, the color draining from her face. The kids stood in the hallway watching, clutching their toys, their eyes wide and silent. Dad sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Hannah, it's over. But Hannah shook her head violently, slamming the paper back onto the table. No, it's not over. I'll call a lawyer. We'll see what they say about this. About you squatting here and taking the car. Mom let out a soft sob, covering her mouth with her hand. The room felt small, the tension pressing in on all of us, the Christmas lights blinking behind Hannah like a cruel joke. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table, locking eyes with her. You want to bring lawyers into this, Hannah? Go ahead. But don't think for a second I'm going to back down. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, her eyes darting to Mom, then to Dad, searching for backup she didn't have. This ends now, I continued, my voice calm but unyielding. You don't get to bully me out of my own house, and you don't get to take the car I paid for. I won't let you. She swallowed hard, her face red, her breathing heavy. You think you're so brave now, don't you? No, I said, standing up straight. I'm done being afraid of you. Her eyes widened just for a second before narrowing again, the rage returning, her hands clenching at her sides. She grabbed her purse off the counter, her movements sharp, her breath coming in quick, angry bursts. This isn't over, Emily. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched her as she stormed out of the kitchen, her footsteps pounding down the hallway, the door slamming so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I looked down at the papers on the table, my hands still shaking, but inside something felt steady, unbreakable. Mom sank into a chair, her head in her hands, while Dad stood beside her, silent, his eyes on the hallway where Hannah had disappeared. And I stood there, breathing slow, knowing that the real fight was just beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, the glow of the streetlight cutting across the room, hearing the soft tick of the clock and the distant hum of the heater. I knew Hannah would come back, and this time I had to be ready. The next morning, I called Jenna, a friend from college who had gone to law school. My voice shook as I explained everything, from the letter Grandma Ruth gave me to the payments I had made on the car. Send me copies of everything, Jenna said calmly. I'll look it over and let you know where you stand. I spent the rest of the day scanning documents, highlighting signatures, digging through folders and old receipts until my fingers were covered in ink and dust. Each click of the scanner felt like a small piece of control coming back to me. By the afternoon, Jenna called me back. Her voice was firm, reassuring. Emily, you're in the clear. The house deed is valid and the car payments are well documented. She doesn't have a case. Relief flooded through me so sharp it brought tears to my eyes, but I blinked them away, letting out a shaky breath. Thank you, I whispered. Don't let her bully you, Jenna said. You're protected, Emily. I hung up, pulled up my email, and typed out a message. My fingers shook at first, but as I typed, they steadied. I attached the scanned deed, the payment records, the highlighted sections Jenna had told me to include. I addressed it to Hannah, CC'd Mom, Dad, and a few of the relatives Hannah had dragged into her drama. Subject: clarification on property and vehicle ownership. Body: Hannah. This is to confirm that I am the legal owner of the house per the deed transferred by Grandma Ruth, and I have made all payments on the vehicle you are claiming as family property. I am not leaving my home and I am not relinquishing the car. This is final. Emily, I read it twice, my heart pounding before hitting send. The whoosh of the email leaving felt like a breath of air in a suffocating room. I left my room, walking down the hallway, hearing Hannah's voice on the phone in the living room, low and harsh. She looked up as I entered, her eyes narrowing as she ended the call. So you're sending emails now, she sneered. I'm making it clear where I stand, I replied, my voice calm. She let out a humorless laugh, her hands clenched around her phone. You think this makes you look strong? It makes you look pathetic, Emily. Dad stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. Hannah, it's enough. She spun toward him, her face flushed, tears brimming in her eyes. You're taking her side. You're choosing her over me and the kids. Mom stepped closer, her voice shaking. We're not choosing sides. We're asking you to stop. Hannah's tears spilled over, but her eyes were still hard. You don't understand what it's like to be alone, to raise kids alone, to fight for everything while she just sits here. I swallowed, feeling the words hit, but I didn't let them break me. I'm not taking anything from you, Hannah. She shook her head, wiping her tears roughly with the back of her hand. You don't get it, Emily. You never have. She turned, grabbing her purse, slinging it over her shoulders shaking as she walked toward the door. She paused, her hand on the handle, turning back to look at me, her eyes red, her face twisted with anger and something that almost looked like fear. This isn't over, Emily, she said, her voice low, shaking. And then she was gone, the door slamming behind her, leaving the house in silence. The next morning, the air in the house was heavy, every sound sharp against the silence. I found Dad in the kitchen, staring into his coffee, his shoulders slumped. Mom was at the sink rinsing dishes she had already washed twice. They looked up when I entered, and I could see it in their eyes, the guilt, the exhaustion, the silent apologies. Dad cleared his throat. Emily, we should have remembered what your grandmother wanted. Mom nodded, her hands twisting in the towel. We got caught up in everything, the funeral, the paperwork, taking care of everyone. We forgot. I sat down across from them, my hands folded, the weight of the last few weeks pressing on my shoulders. I know you didn't mean to forget. Dad sighed, setting his cup down. We don't want you to leave, Emily. We never did. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. We just wanted peace. I swallowed, feeling the tension in my chest loosen just a little. I know. Before any of us could say more, the front door slammed open and Hannah stormed in, her hair a mess, her eyes wild, her phone clutched in her hand. You think you're so clever, Emily, she hissed, waving the phone at me. Sending emails to everyone, trying to make me look like the bad guy. I stood up slowly, keeping my voice calm. I sent the truth, Hannah. I needed everyone to see it. She let out a bitter laugh, tears spilling down her cheeks. You think you've won. You think this is over because you have some piece of paper and some lawyer friend. Mom took a step forward, her voice gentle. Hannah, please don't do this. Hannah ignored her, her eyes locked on mine, her hands shaking. You're tearing this family apart, Emily. You're selfish. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced myself to stay steady. I'm protecting what Grandma gave me. I'm protecting myself. She shook her head, a strangled sob escaping her lips. You don't understand what it's like raising 2 kids alone, struggling every day while you hide here. I'm not hiding, I said, my voice firm. I've been trying to rebuild, trying to find work, trying to help Mom and Dad. Hannah let out a scream of frustration, stomping her foot like a child, her face red. You're ruining everything. The kids appeared in the doorway, clutching each other, their eyes wide with fear. Mommy, the older one whispered. Hannah turned, her anger collapsing into tears as she knelt down, pulling them into her arms. It's okay, baby. Mommy's just trying to protect you. The room was silent, except for Hannah's sobs and the soft whimpers of the children. Dad stepped forward, his voice quiet but strong. Hannah, this has to stop. She looked up at him, her mascara streaked, her eyes swollen. You're taking her side. You're choosing her over us. Mom moved beside Dad, her hand on his arm. We're not choosing sides. We're choosing to stop this fighting. Hannah stood slowly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, her breath coming in sharp, angry gasps. She turned to me, her eyes burning. This isn't over, Emily. And she walked out, the kids trailing behind her, the door closing softly, leaving the house in a silence so deep it felt like it was waiting for the next storm. For a long moment, I just stood there listening to the quiet. No one moved, the house holding its breath, the Christmas lights still blinking softly, reminding me of the storm that had passed and the one that might still come. Dad let out a long sigh, running a hand through his hair. She'll figure it out, he said quietly. Mom wiped her eyes, looking at me, her face tired but calm. We're staying, Emily. If you'll have us. I nodded, swallowing the tightness in my throat. This is your home too. We didn't say anything else that night. We cleaned the kitchen together, stacking dishes, wiping down counters, moving around each other in a quiet, careful dance that felt like the first step towards something new. A week later, Hannah came back with boxes, her eyes down, her movements sharp as she packed the kids' clothes, toys, and her few things into the car. She didn't speak to me, but I saw the way her shoulders shook when she hugged Mom goodbye, how Dad placed a hand on her back as she climbed into the driver's seat. She drove away without looking back, the kids waving from the back window, their faces small and pressed to the glass. I stood on the porch, watching until the car turned the corner, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Inside, the house felt different, lighter, like it was ours again, but in a new way. Mom and Dad started talking about painting the living room, fixing the leaky faucet, planting new flowers in the spring. They didn't ask for permission, but they asked for my thoughts, and for the first time I felt like an adult in my own home. A few days later, I got the call. The nonprofit I had interviewed with offered me the position. The relief was so strong it made me sit down, the tears coming before I could stop them. Mom hugged me when I told her, her smile bright, Dad clapping a hand on my shoulder, his pride quiet but warm. I started the job the next Monday, the first day of a new year, walking into the office with my head high, the nerves in my stomach mixing with excitement. Each paycheck I put a little aside, saving to fix the roof, to repaint the front porch, to make the house the way I wanted it, the way Grandma would have wanted it. Late at night I would sit in the living room, the lights low, the house quiet, and I would feel at peace. A month later, Hannah texted. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done what I did. It wasn't a long message and it didn't fix everything, but it was something. I stared at it for a long time before typing back. I forgive you. She didn't reply, and that was okay. Because I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for me. I learned that owning something isn't just about a piece of paper or a name on a title. It's about standing your ground, protecting your space, and choosing the life you want even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Spring came early that year. I opened the windows, letting the fresh air wash away the heaviness that had settled in the corners of the house, letting the curtains dance in the soft breeze as the sun warmed the wooden floors. Dad and I replaced the old porch light together, his hand steady as he held the fixture while I screwed it into place. Mom planted daffodils along the walkway, her laughter soft when the dirt smudged her cheek. We had dinners together, but there was a new quiet respect between us, a recognition that we were all building something different, something healthier, one conversation at a time. One Saturday I went through the closets, pulling out boxes of old clothes, toys, and papers that no one needed anymore. Dad helped me load them into the car and we dropped them off at the donation center, driving home with the windows down, the warm air brushing against our faces. That night I sat on the porch steps looking at the stars, my phone buzzing softly in my pocket. It was a text from Hannah. I'm trying. I know it's not enough, but I'm trying. I read it twice, my thumb hovering over the screen before I replied. That's all you can do. I put the phone down beside me, closing my eyes, breathing in the cool night air. It wasn't forgiveness in the way people wrote about it in books, but it was enough for me to let go of the weight I had carried. A few days later, I walked into my new job, a folder tucked under my arm, my steps sure, the nerves replaced by determination. The nonprofit's office smelled like coffee and paper, the quiet hum of people working towards something bigger than themselves filling the air. I learned names, routines, tasks that challenged me, reminded me that I was capable, that I had something to offer. Each paycheck, I put a portion aside, saving for the roof repair, for the porch paint, for the small upgrades that would turn this house into the home I wanted. One evening, I found Mom standing in the hallway, her hand resting on one of Grandma Ruth's photos. She turned to me, tears in her eyes, but a small smile on her lips. "She would be so proud of you," she whispered. I hugged her, feeling the warmth of her arms around me, the weight of everything we had been through softening into something bearable. Later that week, I walked into the living room, the light of the setting sun, turning the walls golden, the shadows long and soft. I stood there, letting it sink in, letting the silence of the house wrap around me, steady and calm. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was safety, choice, and the quiet courage of rebuilding. It was the place where I learned that I could stand my ground, protect what was mine, and still open my heart to forgiveness, to family, to starting again. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments.